Hello Year 11 and welcome to OCR History B, Making of America 1789 to 1900 content videos. The first video that I'm going to be speaking through is an overview of the Making of America. So we're going to be going through some key terms and themes that will be important for your understanding for the exam. So to start off, just a reminder of our timeline for the Making of America. We have 5 themes throughout the course, and you need to know the dates of these confidently, as the questions will always have dates attached and your evidence has to be applicable. On the timeline, you will be able to see presidents during each time period that are going to appear in red at the bottom. You do not need to know all of these presidents, but you should know the names of those who passed the key legislation. So the first theme on the Making of America paper is America's expansion. So why did America expand and what caused this to happen? You can now see on screen some key events that happened during this first time period. And as I said, the names of the presidents, as much as you don't need to know all of them. Our second time period is the West. So why did people begin to migrate to the far west of America? And the dates of this time period are 1839 to 1860. Period 3 has 2 themes within it, so it's really important that you realise that, and the dates for the third section are 1861 to 1877, so you need to know that there are 2 themes within that time period, and they are the American Civil War and settlement and conflict on the plains. It's important that you know that these run alongside each other, so you can see on screen that the events that are in green are linked to the American Civil War, and the events that have appeared in purple are linked to the topic of settlement and conflict on the plains. The final theme then for Making of America is American cultures, and the final dates for that time period are 1877 to 1900. So it might be worth taking a screenshot of this timeline. You do have one of these as well in your exercise books, but these are the dates of the course that you absolutely need to know. So as stated at the start of this video, this is just an overview and it will be a very quick recap of key terminology and key themes that you will need to know to ensure that you succeed on your Making of America paper for all time periods. So first of all, we're going to look through very quickly the systems of government that were in place in America. So first of all, we're going to start off with the Constitution. So you need to know that this was the rules which stated how America should be run. And the founding fathers of America, for example, George Washington, made the Constitution, and all states have to follow it. So as much as states can have their own laws, they need to make sure that they are in line with the expectations of the Constitution. We then have Congress, who pass laws for America, so that's America's version of Parliament. We have the President, who is elected every 4 years and can make and block laws, so it's America's version of the Queen and the Prime Minister combined, so the most powerful individual in the United States. We've got the Supreme Court, who heard the nation's most challenging court cases and decided who was guilty by consulting the Constitution. And then we've got this difference between states and territories. So a state is an area that has a high population. They can make their own laws as long as they are in line with the Constitution, and they have their own governor and system of government. State members could vote in national elections. And just a reminder here that to become a state, you have to have enough white Americans to make your area qualify to become a state and have that additional level of power. So this is what lots of the territories wanted to become, to enable them to make their own laws and to have a voice really in how America ran as a whole. We've then got territories. So these are areas of land without enough people to become a state. So people living in a territory, as I've said, have less power. They cannot vote in national elections until the president gives them the right to join as a state. So just as a basis, really, you need to understand these key systems of the American government. So a really important part of succeeding on this paper is having an understanding of the different categories of Americans at the time. If the exam board asks you a question on African Americans and you are speaking about Native Americans, obviously you are not going to secure any marks. So it's really important that we understand the difference between these racial groups within America. So first of all, we have white Americans. So they or their families had arrived to America from Europe, so they were European immigrants. Most could vote if they lived in a state and if they owned property. So most white Americans own their own land, so between 60 and 90% of white males could vote in the USA. So the white Americans are the people who are having their voices heard. So for Native Americans, they can be known as three different names. We've got Indians, we've got Native Americans, and then we have Indigenous people. You need to know that all of these terms are relating to the Native Americans. So these are the groups who lived in tribes and came into conflict with white Americans quite often because of the fact that the white Americans were trying to expand into native land. Indians could vote, but only if they paid US taxes. So there was lots and lots of conflict between the indigenous people, the Native Americans, and the white Americans. And it's really important that you are comfortable with that term indigenous that is on screen in pink. And finally, we have Black Americans. So these are also known as African Americans. The vast majority of Black Americans were living in the USA as slaves. They had no right to vote. In the Constitution, it stated that people's property could not be confiscated. And at this time in American history, at the start of our course, we saw that Black Americans were perceived as somebody's property. So we've got here that the North saw slaves as people, generally speaking, but the South saw them as property. This meant that they had no rights, and this is why we see slavery being carried out in the South of America. So another key theme within the making of America is understanding that there are fundamental differences between the North and the South of the United States. So we need to have an understanding of these to enable us to see why we ended up with civil war in our course in 1861. So we need to be aware of these to enable us to answer questions on the Civil War, but also to have an understanding of why conflict was building throughout our course. So first of all, one of the biggest differences is in terms of economics or money. So in the North, we have factories, we have businessmen. They are paying their workers, and because if they don't, then their workers will go on strike. So we see the North paying wages normally. In comparison, in the South, they are using slave labour predominantly on cotton plantations, which are large farms. They are also growing crops such as tobacco and rice, and they use slaves to pick these. So the North perceive that the South have an economic advantage because they do not have to pay their workers, whereas the North do. In terms of religion, in the North, we've got Christians such as Methodists and Quakers who begin to speak out against slavery and start really the abolition movement because they believe that slavery is immoral. They believe that God has made all men to be free and that they shouldn't be being used as slaves as they are in the South. In comparison, in the South, the Bible is read very differently. We have white Southerners who strongly believe that God has made black people to serve white people. So we've got a real fundamental difference again in religious perspective from both the North and South, despite the fact that both views are coming from Christians. In terms of political differences, just a reminder that the higher the number of people in a state, the more voting power they had. So in the North, they did not believe that slaves should be counted within the population count of a state at all, because they do not want the South to gain any more political power, and they believe in a strong central government. In comparison, in the South said that slaves should class as 3/5 of a person in the population count of a state. So as much as it's not acknowledging the fact that a slave is a full person, it enables the South to get some benefit from the fact that they have slaves as part of their population count. Despite this, slaves do not have the right to vote. And the South believe in a weaker central government and strong state rights. So these are the key differences that are going to lead to a lot of conflict and tension throughout the North and South of America during our course. So the next content video will be on theme 1, which is American expansion, 1789 to 1838.